welcome to Khanijikar. Today we shall discuss Nehru's objectives resolution. Three more freedoms. Nearly 5 months later, on 13 December 1946, this obscure declaration penned by philosophers, freedom fighters, and future statesmen took on historic significance when Jawaharlal Nehru moved was essentially the same text in the Constituent Assembly as a resolution regarding aims and objectives. Nehru's celebrated objectives resolution, as it was more familiar called, consisted of a few cosmetic alterations to the earlier declaration, as well as the addition of three words to supplement the freedoms it enumerated, while the declaration proposed freedom of thought, belief, occasion, association, and action. Nehru's objectives resolution added freedom of expression, faith, and worship. A quick glance at the preamble, as it was adopted in 1950, indicates that Nehru's supplementary concepts proved crucial. The freedoms underlined in the preamble adopted all of Nehru's additional terms, while dropping most of those originally forwarded in the declaration, that is, occasion, association, and action. The relevant line in the preamble, opting for the term liberty over freedom, read as liberty of thought, expression, belief, faith, and worship. Another way of looking at this is to say that all of the freedoms listed in the preamble originated either from Nehru's objectives resolution or from the declaration of the experts committee of the Congress Working Committee, except that these source documents speak of freedom and not liberty. The latter, as we shall see later, being the term preferred by Dr. Ambedkar. Nehru's resolution regarding aims and objectives read as follows. First one, this Constituent Assembly declares its firm and solemn resolve to proclaim India as an independent sovereign republic and to draw up for her future governance a constitution. Second one, wherein the territories that now comprise British India, the territories that now form the Indian states, and such other parts of India as are outside British India, and the states as well as such other territories as are willing to be constituted into the independent sovereign India shall be a union of them all. And third one, wherein the said territories, whether with their present boundaries or with such others as may be determined by the Constituent Assembly, and thereafter according to the law of the Constitution, shall possess and retain the status of autonomous units, together with residuary powers, and exercise all powers and functions of government and administration, serve and accept such powers and functions as are vested in or assigned to the Union, or as are inherent or implied in the Union or resulting therefrom. And fourth one, wherein all power and authority of the sovereign independent India, its constituent parts and organs of government are derived from the people. And fifth one, wherein shall be guaranteed and secured to all the people of India justice, social, economic, and political, equality of status, of opportunity, and before the law, freedom of thought, expression, belief, faith, worship, occasion, association, and action, subject to law and public morality. Sixth one, wherein adequate safeguards shall be provided for minorities, backward and tribal areas, and depressed and other backward classes. And seventh one, whereby shall be maintained the integrity of the territory of the republic and its sovereign rights on land, sea, and air according to justice and the law of civilized nations. And this and eighth one, this ancient land attains its rightful and honored place in the world and make it full and willing contribution to the promotion of world peace and the welfare of mankind. After 8 days of discussion spread across December 1946 and January 1947, the resolution was adopted on 22nd January 1947. This was despite the fact that a member of the Constituent Assembly, H.J. Khandekar, moved that a resolution of so great importance should be passed on 26 January, or Purna Swaraj Divas. This time, however, Nehru did object, stating that the Constituent Assembly was obligated to complete its work as soon as possible and that delays on such an important matter in the early days would not bode well for the promptness expected in the near future. What was interesting about the acceptance of the resolution was the peculiar way in which nearly all historians described its unanimous adoption by the Constituent Assembly. That is, in a solemn manner, with all the members standing. It is true, prior to its adoption, all motions for amendment were withdrawn and the path was cleared for Nehru's objective resolution to shape the inalterable contours of India's future constitution in general and its preamble in particular. Championing justice, equality, and freedom. Nehru and the other members of the Constituent Assembly, and through them the hundreds of millions of Indians for whom they spoke, espoused our bedrock principles, the values that we stood for literally. Objections to the objectives. There had, of course, been numerous suggestions for amendments to the objectives resolution. The chairman of the Constituent Assembly, Rajendra Prasad, noted on 17th December 1946 that he had a list of over 50 names of members who wished to speak and propose amendments to the resolution. Dr. Ambedkar was one of its most articulate critics, honing in on the irony that a dedicated socialist like Nehru would not so much as mention the term socialism in the resolution. Dr. Ambedkar told the chairman, along with Nehru and all those present, that is, if this resolution has reality behind it and a sincerity, of which I have not the least doubt, coming as it does from the mover of the resolution, I should have expected some provision whereby it would have been possible for the state to make economic, social, and political justice a reality, and I should have from that point of view expected the resolution to state in most explicit terms that in order that there may be social and economic justice in the country, that there would be nationalization of industry and nationalization of land. I do not understand how it could be possible for any future government which believes it doing justice socially, economically, and politically, unless its economy is a socialistic economy. Yet, Dr. Ambedkar too refused to stand in the way of the passage of the resolution in the first of many concessions that he made as a member of the Constituent Assembly and later as chairman of its drafting committee. He justified these concessions through eloquent appeals to all the members of the Constituent Assembly, especially those heading rival faction, garnering an unprecedented clamor of applause from all those who were present. Our difficulty is how to make the heterogeneous mass that we have today take a decision in common and march on the way which leads us to unity. In order to make us willing friends, in order to induce every party, every section in this country to make on to the road, it would be an act of greatest statesmanship for the majority party even to make a concession to the prejudices of people who are not prepared to march together, and it is for that I propose to make this appeal. Let us leave aside slogans, let us leave aside words which frighten people. Let us leave aside words which frighten people. Let us even make a concession to the prejudices of our opponents, bring them in so that they may willingly join with us on marching upon that road, which, as I said, if we walk long enough, must necessarily lead us to unity. However, Dr. Ambedkar's call for magnanimous concessions that would lead to unity did not preclude him from making his own position loud and clear.